So, hi everyone, welcome back. This is the part 2 of our demand chapter. So, we are going to start with slope of the demand curve today, right? Let us see what is the slope of the demand curve. We, in the last lecture, had seen the determinants, schedules, and various curves related to demand. Here, we are going to talk more on demand, and we are also going to talk about the law of demand, which is also known as the law of first purchases. So, let's get started. Slope of the demand curve, as you can see, this demand curve right here is downward sloping. So one thing that we have identified is that it is downward sloping. And why is it downward sloping? What is the reason? Because the quantity on the y-axis and the quantity demanded on the x-axis, right, have an inverse relationship. And due to this inverse relationship, this demand curve is downward sloping. Okay, so now let us read what the slope of the demand curve is. Slope of a curve is defined as the change in the variable on the y-axis divided by the change in the variable on the x-axis. So the slope of the demand curve equals the change in price divided by the change in quantity. So basically, if I say slope of the demand curve is equal to change in price, which is denoted by delta P, upon change in the quantity demanded, right? Here, how do we see what is the change that is occurring? So let us take a point right here, right? So let us take this point to be A and let us take this point to be B. And now we have to calculate the change in the demand curve or the slope of the demand curve, right? So let us see how the prices have changed. Here, as you can see, the price is rupees 8, and here the price at point B is rupees 4. So, how do we write the change in price? P1 minus P0 upon Q1 minus Q0, where P1 and Q1 represents the new price and the new quantity respectively, whereas P0 and Q0 represents the old price and old quantity respectively. Now it is very cluttered. Let me remove it. Yeah, now we are going to calculate, right? So here the new price came out to be 4, okay? And the old price was 8. Here the new quantity demanded is 4. Earlier it was 2. So 4 minus 2. Now what do we get here is minus 4 upon 2, which comes out to be minus 2, as you can see right here. So we have calculated the slope of the demand curve, right? And I hope it is very clear how to calculate slope of any curve that comes your way in the future. Due to the inverse relationship between price and demand, the demand curve slopes downward, so the slope is negative. Why are we getting minus 2 here? Because this demand curve has a slope which is negative. Negative means that it is downward sloping. So this minus basically indicates that it is downward sloping. Slope of the demand curve measures the flatness or steepness of the demand curve. It is based on the absolute change in price and quantity, right? So basically it tells you how flat or how steep your demand curve is, right? Here we can see it is a little flatter, right? But if I just draw a demand curve like this, it is much more steeper, okay, although it's not straight, but yeah. So I hope you have understood this. Let us move ahead. Now let us see what the law of demand is. Law of demand states the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, keeping other factors constant, ceteris paribus. This law is also known as first law of purchase. So basically the law of demand gives an inverse relationship between two variables, which is price and second is quantity demanded. Okay, and now when I am talking about the law of demand, I am assuming all the other factors to be constant. Ceteris paribus. We had already learned about the determinants of demand. So we basically know what are the factors affecting demand. So apart from our price of the commodity, all the other factors are assumed to be constant. Be it the price of substitute goods, complementary goods, income of the consumer, taste and preferences, right? Also it is known as the first law of purchase, right? So you can see that the assumptions that we basically take for the law of demand, they cover these basic topics, right? Price of substitute goods do not change. Prices of complementary goods remain constant. Income of the consumer remains the same. There is no expectation of change in the price in the future. Taste and preferences of the consumers remain the same. As you can see, again, we have a demand curve right here. You can see it is downward sloping. At rupees 5, I am demanding my one quantity, right? Only one unit of the commodity. At price 4, now I am demanding 2 units of the commodity. At 3 price, I am demanding 3 units of the commodity. At 2, 4 and 1, 5. So here, as my price is decreasing, my quantity demanded is increasing. So I hope this is clear. Let us move forward. These are some important facts about the law of demand. First is inverse relationship. So it states the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. It simply affirms that an increase in price will tend to reduce the quantity demanded and a fall in price will lead to an increase in the quantity demanded. Right? So it just basically tells you an inverse relationship between two economic variables, price and quantity demanded. Second is qualitative, not quantitative. It makes a qualitative statement only. It only tells you that, as price would increase, your quantity demanded would fall. But it does not give you the exact magnitude or exact number by which the quantity demanded is going to fall as an effect of the change in price. Okay? So it indicates the direction of change. It just tells you it's going to fall or it's going to rise. It will not tell you the magnitude. Okay? No proportional relationship. It does not establish any proportional relationship between change in price and the resultant change in demand. For example, if the price is rising by 10%, you are not sure by what amount the quantity demanded is going to fall. Be it 10%, 20%, 30%, we do not know. Okay? And also, the law is one sided. It only explains the change of price on the change of quantity demanded, and it does not explain the change of quantity demanded on the change of price. Right? Effect of change in quantity demanded on the price of the commodity. So it does not tell you that. It only explains the effect of change in price on the quantity demanded. It states nothing about the effect of change in quantity demanded on the price of the commodity. Now, what are the reasons for the law of demand? Why does law of demand hold true? Why does it work? So first is law of diminishing marginal utility. You might have read about consumers equilibrium. If not, just see what this law basically means. Law of diminishing marginal utility, or law of DMU in short, basically states that as we consume more and more units of a commodity, the utility derived from each successive unit goes on decreasing. For example, I'm very thirsty. I just came home and I drank one glass of water, right? So the first glass of water is going to give me more utility as compared to the successive glasses that I will consume, and there would be a point where I wouldn't want to drink more water and my utility would be zero, right? So as we consume more and more commodities, the utility derived from each successive unit goes on decreasing. So the demand for a commodity depends on its utility. If the consumer gets more satisfaction, he will pay more. As a result, the consumer will not be prepared to pay the same price for additional units of the commodity, right? The consumer will buy more units of the commodity only when the price falls. So basically, the consumer buys goods only when their prices are going to fall. They are not ready to pay the same prices for many units of the commodities. Okay, so this is considered the basic reason for the operation of law of demand. Second is substitution effect. Substitution effect refers to substituting one commodity in place of another when it becomes relatively cheaper. So when the price of a given commodity falls, it becomes relatively cheaper compared to its substitute. Let us see an example. Okay, for example, if the price of Pepsi falls, okay, and the price of Coke is constant, it is the same, right? Pepsi will become relatively cheaper and will be substituted for Coke. That is, the demand for Pepsi will rise. Fine. Now, what are the reasons for the law of demand? We saw two reasons: substitution effect and the law of diminishing marginal utility. We are seeing the third reason for the law of demand, which is the income effect. Income effect refers to the effect on demand when the real income of the consumer changes due to change in the price of the given commodity. Now see, if I have rupees 40 as my income, okay, rupees 40 as my income and I want to buy chocolates, each worth rupees 10 each. So how many chocolates would I be able to buy? 4, right? 4. But if the price of my chocolate falls to rupees 8, how many chocolates can I now buy? Obviously 5, right? So here this is same, my income is same, but my real income has changed. Real income is always in reference with the price of the commodity, right? So if you can see here earlier when the price was 10, I was buying 4 units of the commodity. Now as my price of the commodity has reduced to rupees 8, now I am able to buy 5 units of the same commodity. So this is known as the income effect, right? It's just a little, it's very relevant to know that price effect is equal to the income effect plus the substitution effect. Okay, we are going to read more about it as we proceed further. For right now, just know that price effect is equal to substitution effect plus the income effect. Now, additional customers, when the price of a commodity falls, many new consumers who were not in a position to buy it earlier due to its high price starts purchasing it. In addition, old customers start demanding more due to the reduced price. For example, if the price of an ice cream family pack falls from 100 to 50, many consumers who couldn't afford it earlier can now buy it, and old customers can consume more. So the total demand increases, right? So we are going to have additional customers for a commodity just because its price has fallen, and now more people are in a position to buy and use that commodity. Now, different uses. Some commodities like milk, electricity, etc., it has several uses, some more important than others. So when the price of goods, say milk, increases, so people would not be making, curd or curd paneer or something like that out of it, right? It just gets restricted to one purpose, that is drinking. But if the price of the milk falls, what would happen is that even I would, substitute it, and I would, be making my own curd, paneer, cheese out of it, right? Now, there are certain exceptions to the law of demand. Okay, so we just saw that what was the law of demand? That where prices increase, the quantity demanded of a commodity decreases, and when the prices basically decrease, the quantity demanded increases, right? We saw this, right? Now, there are some exceptions to the law of demand. There are certain goods which do not follow the law of demand. Giffen goods. These are special kind of inferior goods on which consumer spends a large part of his income, and their demand rises with an increase in price and falls with the decrease in price. Right? So here the quantity demanded and the price of the commodity, they have a positive relationship. Right? They're directly related. For example, in our country, it is often seen that when the price of coarse cereals like jowar and bajra falls, right, consumers spend less on them. So bajra has become relatively cheaper, but still people are not going to buy it. They're going to move to superior cereals like wheat and rice. Alright. So the second are status symbol goods. This exception relates to certain prestigious goods used as status symbols. For example, diamonds, golds, antique paintings, etc. They are bought due to the prestige they confer upon the possessor, right? And they are going to be bought only if their prices increase. Because if their prices are no longer high, people wouldn't see them as status symbol goods, right? These are known as goods of ostentation also. Now, there's this Giffen's paradox. So, in the early 19th century, Sir Robert Giffen he observed that when the price of bread increased, low-paid British wage earners bought more bread, not less. These wage earners lived mainly on a diet of bread. With the rise in its price, they were forced to cut down their consumption of meat and other expensive food items. To maintain their intake of food, they bought more bread even at higher prices. And this phenomenon was referred to as Giffin's paradox as it went against the law of demand. Third exception to the law of demand is fear of shortage. So if consumers they expect a shortage or scarcity in the near future, right? So they would start buying more of that commodity even if the prices are increasing right now due to fear of a further rise in price. For example, during emergencies like war and famines, consumers demand goods even at higher prices due to fear of shortage and general insecurity. Fourth is ignorance. Now, consumers may buy more of a commodity at a higher price when they're ignorant of the prevailing prices of the commodity in the market. So, there would be a seller basically who would be charging about 100 rupees, but the commodity is actually a 40 and the consumer has no idea about it. There's lack of information prevailing in the market, there is ignorance on the part of the consumer. He's not a rational consumer. So, he's going to buy that commodity at the prevailing price, not at the prevailing price, sorry, at 100, right? Which is basically ignorance. Fashion related goods. Goods related to fashion do not follow the law of demand. Their demand increases even with a rise in price. For example, if a particular type of a dress is in fashion, demand for it will increase even if its prices are rising. Sixth is the necessities of life. So, another exception occurs in the use of commodities which become necessities of life due to their constant use. For example, commodities like rice, wheat, salt, medicines, etc., they are purchased even if their prices increase. And seventh is the change in weather. With the change in season weather, demand for certain commodities also changes, irrespective of any change in their prices. For example, demand for umbrellas increases in the rainy season even with an increase in the prices. Right? So basically, people need umbrellas in the rainy season. Even if their prices are rising, people would need them, right? So therefore, people are going to be, you know, buying more of the umbrellas at even at higher prices. Now let us see what do we mean by movement along the demand curve. I had already told you what change in quantity demanded means. When the quantity demanded changes due to change in the own price of the commodity, it is referred to as change in quantity demanded. Right? Now, what is movement along the demand curve? Right? So, as you can see in the figure, right, we are moving. Let us suppose these are 3 points. Okay. This is A, this is point B, and this is point C. Right? So, if my price falls from 7 to 5, my quantity demanded is increasing from Q2 to Q. So, here the movement is along the same demand. Okay, and if my prices increase from about 3 to 5, right, then my quantity demanded is increasing from Q1 to Q, right? So, movement is along the same demand curve again, right? So, if I talk about an upward movement, which is known as contraction, so when prices rise to OP2, quantity demanded falls to OQ2. So here, if the price rises to OP2, right? Suppose this 5 is OP and this price 7 is OP2, right? So if my price is rising from 5 to 7, the quantity demanded is basically falling from Q to Q2. So this is an upward movement and this is known as contraction. So it leads to an upward movement from A to C along the same demand curve DD. Downward movement, if I talk about, which is known as the expansion. So a fall in the price from OP to OP1. So OP1, let us suppose, is 3. Okay. Now our quantity demanded has increased from Q to Q1 and my point B has shifted to point C now. So this is expansion and the earlier that we talked about an upward movement, it was contraction, right? So change in quantity demanded occurs due to change in price which leads to a movement along the same demand curve, either a downward movement which is known as expansion in demand due to decrease in price or an upward movement which is known as contraction in demand due to an increase in the price. So let us study expansion and contraction in demand with the help of a demand schedule and a demand curve. Expansion in demand refers to rise in the quantity demanded due to fall in the price of the commodity, other factors remaining constant. It leads to a downward movement along the same demand curve, also known as extension in demand or increase in the quantity demanded. As you can see, as the price falls from 20 to 15, our quantity demanded increases from 100 to 150. So there is a downward movement along the same demand curve. This is known as expansion in demand. Contraction in demand refers to the fall in the quantity demanded due to a rise in price of the commodity, other factors remaining constant. It leads to an upward movement along the same demand curve, also known as decrease in quantity demanded. So as you can see, the price increases from 20 to 25. The quantity demanded falls from 100 to 70, right? So here it leads to a upward movement. It leads to an upward movement along the same demand curve, right? And it is also known as contraction in demand. Okay. Now let us talk about the shift in the demand curve. It is related to the change in demand. Okay, what is change in demand? When quantity demanded changes due to any other factors other than the price of the own commodity, then it is said to be change in demand. Now, when change in demand takes place, there is always a shift in the demand curve. The shift in the demand curve could be due to any of the various reasons mentioned here: change in price of substitute goods, change in price of complementary goods, change in income of the consumers, change in taste and preferences, expectation of change in the price in the future, change in the population, change in the distribution of income, or change in the season and weather. Now, here the shift could be a leftward shift, which is known as decrease in demand, or a rightward shift, which is known as increase in demand. So let us see this. So increase in demand refers to the rise in demand of a commodity caused by any factor other than the own price, right? Demand rises at the same price. So here the price remains the same, but there is some other factor which is basically increasing the demand for a commodity, right? So let's plot it. All right. Now see, at the same price 20, earlier the demand was 100. Okay. For example, let us suppose. So here was your demand curve DD. Okay. Now, at the same price, the quantity demanded has increased to 150. So this is your demand curve D1, D1. Right. So as you can see, there is a rightward shift. So when there is an increase in demand, a rightward shift is going to take place in the demand curve. Whereas if you can see at the same price 20, so it is affected by factors other than the price of the commodity. Here, earlier it was 100 at price 20, now it has fallen to 70. So let us suppose it was DD, so this is D2, D2. Okay. So here a leftward shift has taken place, right? So when there is a decrease in demand, it refers to fall in the demand of a commodity caused by any factor other than its own price. Demand falls at the same price or remains the same even at lower prices, right? It leads to a leftward shift in the demand curve, right? Okay, let us talk about substitute goods and complementary goods. Substitute goods are goods which can be used in place of one another for satisfaction of a particular want, like tea and coffee. Demand for a given commodity varies directly with the price of the substitute goods. For example, if the price of tea, I have given this example earlier as well, rises, right? The quantity demanded of coffee is going to increase. Why is it going to increase? Because it is going to become relatively cheaper in comparison to tea. So here it is varying directly. That is why it is an upward sloping graph right here. Right? Whereas if I talk about the complementary goods, they are the goods which are used together to satisfy a particular want, like tea and sugar, and they basically vary inversely. For example, price of tea increases. Okay. So quantity demanded for sugar will reduce. Okay, because it would be very expensive to use both of these things together to satisfy a particular want, right? So here it is varying inversely, that is why it is a downward sloping curve, right? Let us see this. First is nature of demand and the relation between substitute and the complementary goods. So if I talk about the nature of demand, in the substitute we have a competitive demand, and in complementary goods we have joint demand. Here we have a positive relationship with the quantity demanded of another substitute goods, and here we have a negative relationship with the quantity demanded of another complementary good. Alright, so this is the last topic that we are doing today, and this is normal goods and inferior goods. So normal goods, basically I told you that with the increase in income of a given consumer, the quantity demanded of a particular commodity increases, right? So thereby we call them the normal goods, right? And if I talk about inferior goods refer to those goods whose demand decreases with the increase in income. There exists an inverse relationship between income and demand. For example, let us see examples in both of the cases. So if I talk about the inferior goods, if the income of a consumer rises, then he prefers to replace his black and white TV with a colored one, right? And if I talk about example of a normal good, if the demand for TV increases with the rise in income, then TV will be called a normal good. So here income effect is positive, right? Because as income is increasing, the quantity demanded is increasing. So as Y is increasing, that is the income is increasing, the quantity demanded is increasing.